Ethan Cole had spent nearly 2 decades patrolling the rugged landscapes of Yellowstone's northern range. The wilderness was his home, and its dangers were as familiar to him as the creak of his old cabin door. Each dawn, he pulled on the same weathered boots, tightened his ranger's belt, and stepped into a world that never played by human rules. He had seen storms rise out of blue skies, wildfires spark from a single careless ember, and grizzlies vanish into the pines without a sound. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for the morning when instinct and duty would collide. Ethan lived alone at the forest's edge, where towering pines met endless valleys. His porch overlooked a winding river that shimmered silver beneath the rising sun. The walls of his cabin told the story of his life. Photographs of elk grazing in meadows, bison trudging through winter snow, eagles frozen mid-flight. But among them was one absence that stood out: bears. Ethan respected them too much to get close. Every ranger knew the unwritten law: never interfere with a mother bear and her cubs. It wasn't just dangerous, it was practically a death sentence. That spring morning began quietly, almost peacefully. The scent of wet earth and pine needles lingered from an overnight rain. Birds trilled in the canopy, their voices echoing against the cliffs. Ethan walked his usual patrol route, his boots leaving crisp imprints in the damp soil. He checked trail markers, listened for movement, and noted fresh tracks in the mud. A mother elk had passed through hours earlier, her calves in tow. Coyotes had crossed the ridge, their paw prints scattered in the soft earth. All of it was routine, signs of a forest alive and thriving. Yet there was something in the air that morning, a tension Ethan couldn't quite name. The forest felt watchful, as if holding its breath. He paused at a familiar overlook, raising his binoculars to the valley below. Streams from the spring thaw had carved new channels through the marsh, glinting in the early sun. They were beautiful, but dangerous. Over the years, Ethan had pulled more than a few deer from the sucking mud, their frantic eyes wide with panic as the earth tried to claim them. Deer were one thing, but bears? That was another matter entirely. As the minutes passed, the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. He adjusted the strap of his gear, the weight pressing against his back. Something was different in the forest that morning, though he couldn't see it yet. He didn't know that just beyond the ridge, a sound waited for him, a sound that would test everything he thought he understood about the wild and about himself. The first hint of trouble came as a faint, wavering cry carried by the wind. Ethan stopped mid-step, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. At first, he thought it might be the distant call of a bird or the whimper of a coyote pup. But as the sound echoed again, raw, desperate, and strangely human in its urgency, his chest tightened. He knew that sound. It was the cry of a bear cub in distress. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. Training manuals, survival guides, and even his own experience told him one unbreakable rule: never get between a mother bear and her cub. Yet, despite everything, his feet carried him toward the sound. The cries grew sharper as he approached the marshland. The ground softened under his boots, each step heavier than the last. He crouched behind a fallen log, peering across the clearing, and his breath caught in his throat. There, no more than 50 feet away, a small black bear cub thrashed helplessly in a pool of mud. Its glossy fur was plastered with muck, each movement dragging it deeper. Tiny paws clawed at the surface, but the mud held fast like quicksand. The cub's eyes, wide, terrified, and glistening with exhaustion, locked briefly with Ethan's. The sight pierced through the armor of rules and caution he had built over 20 years. This was not just wildlife doing what wildlife did. This was a creature dying in plain sight. Ethan's eyes scanned the ground around the cub, and his stomach dropped. Massive paw prints circled the mud, pressed deep into the earth. The mother had been there, had tried to reach her cub, and had been forced back by the same treacherous ground. Branches were snapped, vegetation flattened, signs of her desperate attempts. Which meant one thing: she wasn't far. And if she returned to find a man closing in on her baby, there would be no second chances. The cub let out another weak cry, though softer now, more like a whimper than a call. Its tiny head bobbed forward, heavy with fatigue. Steam rose off the mud in the warming morning air, surrounding the animal in a ghostly mist. Each shallow breath seemed to take the last of its strength. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Logic told him to leave, to respect the brutal laws of nature, to remember that this was how the wild worked. But something inside him rebelled. This wasn't the natural cycle of predator and prey. This was a trap, an unnatural hazard, formed by spring floods and unstable earth. The cub hadn't stumbled into danger as part of the wild order. It had been caught by circumstance. And Ethan, standing there, was the only one who could tip the scales. He adjusted the strap of his rescue pack, the rope and gear pressing into his back. He had used them countless times, for hikers, for deer, even once for a stranded elk, but never for a bear. The thought of stepping into that muck, of facing what could happen if the mother returned, made his throat dry. But as he looked back at the cub, sinking deeper with each struggle, the decision crystallized. Sometimes in the wild, survival wasn't just about following rules. It was about knowing when to break them. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the forest pressing down on his shoulders. He knew what had to be done. Ethan dropped his pack to the ground, the metallic clink of gear muffled by the damp earth. His hands trembled as he unbuckled his belt and shrugged off his heavy ranger's jacket. Out here, even a few extra pounds could mean the difference between steady footing and being swallowed whole by the mud. He tied one end of his rescue rope to a sturdy pine and looped the other around his waist, securing it with the kind of precision only years in the field could teach. The lifeline gave him a measure of comfort, though deep down he knew if things went wrong, it might not be enough. The cub gave a weak, pitiful cry that cut through the morning stillness. Its small body sagged in exhaustion, head barely above the surface. Ethan's heart squeezed at the sight. He gripped a long branch he had snapped from the log, testing the mud ahead of him. The surface looked deceptively solid, a thin crust masking the depths below. He pressed the branch down, watching as it sank almost instantly into the muck. One wrong step, and he'd be in the same trap as the cub. With deliberate care, he stepped forward. The mud grabbed at his boots immediately, sucking with a strength that felt almost alive. He shifted his weight slowly, spreading it across the branch he used as a probe. The rope tugged lightly at his waist, reminding him that retreat was still possible, for now. But each step forward was a step deeper into danger, and he could already feel the chill of the mud creeping past his ankles. The cub's wide eyes followed his approach. It no longer had the energy to thrash, only a faint twitch of its paws against the mire. Ethan spoke softly, barely above a whisper, though he knew the animal couldn't understand. "Easy, little one. Easy." The words were more for himself, a fragile thread of calm as his heart pounded against his ribs. 15 feet away, his right leg plunged without warning. Cold mud surged up to his thigh, pinning him in place. He clenched his teeth, leaning on a branch to spread his weight. The suction pulled at him greedily, eager to claim another victim. For a long moment, he thought he might not be able to move at all. Sweat broke out across his back despite the cool air. Inch by inch, he shifted sideways, redistributing his weight until he managed to wrench his leg free with a sickening slurp. His breath came in harsh gasps. He was close now, 10 feet from the cub. But this was the most dangerous zone, where the ground was more liquid than solid. Every movement had to be deliberate, calculated, or it would be his last. He crouched, preparing a loop of rope he would need to slip around the cub's body. His arms shook from the strain of balancing, his boots sinking deeper with every second. The cub, sensing the nearness of help, stirred weakly. It gave a faint growl, half fear, half instinct. Ethan froze, waiting for it to settle. A panicked thrash now could create waves in the mud strong enough to topple them both. Minutes dragged by, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally the cub stilled again, too tired to resist. He leaned forward, extending the rope, when a sound behind him turned his blood to ice. It was low at first, almost a rumble of distant thunder. Then it grew louder, resonating through the clearing with terrifying clarity. A growl, deep, primal, and unmistakable. Ethan's head snapped around, his body stiffening. From the shadow of the trees, massive shoulders emerged, dark fur bristling in the morning light. The mother bear. Her presence filled the clearing with raw power. She stepped forward, muscles rippling beneath her coat, her breath steaming in the cool air. The ground trembled faintly beneath her weight. She rose briefly on her hind legs, towering nearly 7 feet, before dropping back down and fixing her gaze directly on him. Ethan's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but the mud held him fast. Even if he could move freely, running from a bear was suicide. He remained frozen, rope clutched in his hands, every nerve in his body straining under the weight of her stare. She let out another growl, deeper this time, vibrating through his chest. Her eyes darted from him to the cub, then back again. In those dark, intelligent eyes, Ethan saw no curiosity, no hesitation, only the fierce, ancient instinct to protect her young. To her, he wasn't a ranger trying to save her baby. He was the threat. She stepped closer, slow and deliberate. 20 feet separated them now. Her claws raked the earth as she moved, leaving deep furrows in the soil. Her head lowered, her shoulders rolling forward in the telltale stance of a predator preparing to charge. The rope around Ethan's waist suddenly felt laughably inadequate. The cub whimpered again, its cry carrying weakly through the clearing. The mother's ears twitched, her eyes flicking toward the sound. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression. Not mercy, never that, but recognition. She could see her cub sinking, see the futility of reaching it alone. Still, Ethan knew this was the razor's edge. One wrong movement, and she would unleash the fury every ranger feared most. He didn't move. Couldn't. His life, the cub's fate, and the will of the wilderness all balanced in that moment of silence, broken only by the ragged sound of his own breathing and the soft, desperate cries of a trapped bear cub. Time seemed to slow. Ethan's world narrowed to the space between himself, the cub sinking in the mud, and the towering shadow of the mother bear. She was close enough now that he could see the scars etched across her muzzle, the ridges of muscle shifting beneath her thick fur, the heat rising from her body as clouds of steam escaped with each powerful breath. Her eyes, dark and fierce, locked on him. One charge, one swipe of those claws, and he would never leave this marsh alive. Ethan's body screamed at him to move, but he forced himself to remain still. His grip tightened around the branch that kept him balanced. The rope around his waist, the lifeline tied to the pine behind him, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Against this creature, against her fury, no rope could save him. 15 feet, 10 feet. Her massive paws pressed deep into the earth with every step. She swung her head side to side, a clear sign of agitation. The low rumble in her throat made Ethan's chest vibrate, each growl resonating like distant thunder. He fought the urge to shut his eyes. Then, in the middle of that terrifying approach, something happened. The cub whimpered again, a weak, broken sound that pierced the air like glass. The mother froze mid-step, her ears twitching, her gaze snapping to her baby. The sight of the tiny form, caked in mud and trembling with exhaustion, seemed to shift something deep inside her. She lowered her massive head, her growl fading into silence. Ethan's breath caught. He could feel the shift in the air. The tension wasn't gone. It still clung to the clearing like fog, but it had changed. Instead of blind rage, there was something else in her eyes now. Recognition. Calculation. She stepped closer, not toward Ethan, but toward the edge of the mud pool. Her head dipped low, and she made a sound unlike anything he had ever heard from a bear. Not a growl, not a roar. It was softer, almost a whimper, laced with desperation. Ethan's heart pounded. Was she pleading? The mother bear nudged the ground near the pool with her nose. At first, Ethan thought it was just restless movement. But then she did it again, deliberate, controlled. She shoved a fallen branch toward him, pushing it across the ground. Ethan blinked, disbelief clouding his mind. It wasn't random. She was offering it. For a moment, his body locked in place, too stunned to move. This defied everything he knew, everything he had been taught. Mother bears didn't ask for help. They didn't trust. They destroyed anything that threatened their young. Yet here she was, massive and terrifying, pushing branches toward him as if she understood what he was trying to do. Hands trembling, Ethan reached out and pulled one of the branches closer. He laid it down across the mud, creating a makeshift platform. The mother watched, her breathing heavy, her ears flicking nervously. She nudged another branch forward, then another. The meaning was clear. She wanted him to save her cub. Ethan's throat tightened. The forest was silent, holding its breath. He laid down the branches one by one, building a crude path to distribute his weight. With each step, the mud clutched at him, trying to drag him down, but the branches kept him afloat. The cub's wide eyes followed his every move, and now, even more astonishingly, the mother bear did too. Then, in an act that would stay with him forever, the mother circled to the opposite side of the pool. She crouched, massive paws digging into the mud. With surprising delicacy, she began scraping at the edges, loosening the suction that held her cub. Mud splattered against her fur, streaking her with gray, but she didn't stop. Each strike of her claws sent ripples through the pool, weakening the trap that threatened to claim her young. Ethan swallowed hard, man and beast working together. It felt impossible, unreal, yet it was happening. The cub stirred, sensing the change. Its frantic movements slowed, replaced by faint hope. Ethan crouched low, mud nearly to his knees, and extended the loop of rope. His arms shook, not only from the strain of balancing, but from the weight of the moment. He had to get this right. Easy, he whispered again, voice breaking. Just a little closer. The cub twitched as the rope brushed its side. Then, with one final burst of effort, Ethan slipped the loop around its torso. He pulled it snug, securing it against the cub's slick fur. Relief surged through him, but the danger was far from over. The mud clung fiercely, as if unwilling to let go. He leaned back, tugging gently on the rope. At the same time, the mother dug furiously from her side, her claws churning the muck into slush. The ground trembled with the force of her strikes, but instead of attacking, she seemed to time her efforts with his. Each pull he made, she mirrored with a dig of her paws. It was a partnership born not of trust, but of necessity, and yet, in that necessity, something remarkable bloomed. The cub let out a sharp cry as its chest rose above the surface. Mud poured away, loosening its hold. Ethan pulled harder, muscles screaming with effort. The rope cut into his palms, but he didn't stop. The mother paused for a split second, her dark eyes flashing toward him, then resumed digging with renewed determination. Finally, with a wet, sucking sound, the cub broke free. It collapsed onto the branches, wheezing, its body coated in thick muck but alive. Ethan guided the rope carefully, inching the animal towards solid ground. He expected the mother to lunge the moment her cub was free, to snatch it away and retreat. But she didn't. She waited. She let him guide her baby, step by step, across the crude pathway until its paws touched firm earth. Then, and only then, did she move. She rushed forward, but not at him. Her massive head nudged her cub gently, guiding it toward a shallow stream nearby. She lowered her muzzle and licked at the mud, cleaning its fur with slow, deliberate strokes. The cub leaned against her, trembling but safe. Ethan stood frozen in the mud, chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. His mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. He had stared into the face of death, and instead found cooperation. And then, the most extraordinary moment of all, the mother turned back toward him. Her massive form loomed at the water's edge, her cub pressed safely against her side. She didn't growl. She didn't charge. She lowered her head. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't submission. It was something else entirely, something Ethan could only describe as gratitude. Her eyes met his, and for the briefest moment, man and beast stood on equal ground. Two lives, bound by an act of impossible trust. The forest was silent again, save for the trickle of the stream and the rasp of Ethan's own breath. But in that silence, he understood something profound. The wild wasn't just brutal or unforgiving. It could be merciful. It could surprise you. And sometimes it could even forgive. Ethan didn't remember how long he stood there, waist-deep in mud, staring at the mother bear as she tended to her cub. Time seemed suspended, the forest holding its breath around them. He half expected her to vanish into the trees the moment her baby regained its strength. But instead, she lingered. She glanced at him again, her dark eyes softer now, as if acknowledging the impossible bond forged in those desperate minutes. Carefully, Ethan began to retreat, placing each step with agonizing slowness until he reached the rope's end and pulled himself back onto solid ground. His legs trembled, and his arms ached from the strain, but he couldn't take his eyes off the pair by the stream. The cub was drinking now, its tiny body shivering as it pressed close to its mother. She continued to lick the mud from its fur, every gesture deliberate, protective, and, Ethan dared to believe, grateful. Then something happened that would stay with him forever. The mother bear rose to her full height, towering over the clearing. For a heartbeat, Ethan braced himself, certain this was the moment her instincts would reassert themselves. But she didn't charge. Instead, she pressed one massive paw into the soft earth near the stream, leaving a perfect imprint. Then she lowered her head once more, holding his gaze with an expression that defied explanation. Respect, recognition, gratitude. And just like that, she turned, nudging her cub gently toward the forest. Together, they melted into the trees, leaving only paw prints in the mud and an unforgettable mark on Ethan's soul. Back at his cabin that evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges, Ethan replayed every second in his mind. He had broken the rules, risked his life, and stared death in the face. Yet the wild had answered not with violence, but with trust. For years, he would tell the story, not as a warning, but as a reminder, that the line between man and nature isn't always as sharp as we think. Sometimes, in the unlikeliest moments, the wild reveals something greater than fear, its capacity for connection, for understanding, even for gratitude.